The Forgotten Sector, the Great Council Chamber, had never been so silent in all its 3,000 years of existence. And every representative from the 47 spacefaring species held their breath as they watched the impossible unfold before their eyes on the massive holographic display. High Councillor Vareth of the Thelani Collective stood at the center of the chamber with all four of his eyes blinking rapidly in what his species recognized as pure terror. And his tentacles trembled as he pointed toward the screen, where a small metal ship was pushing through the supposedly impenetrable barrier that surrounded the forbidden star system. "They have broken through," Vareth announced in a voice that cracked with fear. "The humans have escaped their containment after 3,000 years of imprisonment." Ambassador Crix of the Veloci Empire rose from her seat, and her chitinous mandibles clicked together in a sound that meant extreme concern among her people. And she demanded to know how such a thing could be possible when the barrier had been designed by the greatest minds in galactic history to last for 50,000 years. Vareth had no answer that would satisfy anyone in that chamber, because the truth was simple and terrifying at the same time. And he spoke it plainly for all to hear. "We underestimated them," he said, "just as our ancestors did when they first encountered the planet called Earth." The ancient records began to play on the display, and every being in the chamber watched with growing dread as the history of humanity unfolded before them like a nightmare that refused to end 3,000 years ago. The first survey ships had discovered the humans during what they called their industrial age. And what those ships had found had sent shockwaves of fear through every corner of the galaxy that had already been explored and colonized by peaceful species. The humans were classified as deathworlders of the highest and most dangerous category that had ever been recorded in galactic history. And the reasons for this classification were numerous and horrifying to species that had evolved on gentler worlds. They breathed an atmosphere made largely of oxygen, which was a gas so corrosive that it could eat through metal given enough time. And they not only survived in this poison, but actually required it to live. They consumed the flesh of other creatures, and they did not do this out of desperation or necessity, but actually seemed to enjoy the act of eating dead animals. And they had developed thousands of different ways to prepare and consume meat over their short history. Their bodies operated at temperatures that would cause most galactic species to suffer severe burns. And they could survive in temperature ranges that spanned over 100 degrees without any special equipment. Their cardiovascular systems pumped blood that contained iron through their bodies at pressures that would rupture the organs of any other known sentient being. And this blood was a deep red color that many species found disturbing to look upon, but none of these biological facts were what had caused the Council of 3,000 years ago to make their fateful decision to lock humanity away from the rest of the galaxy forever. It was their history that had sealed their fate. In just 10,000 years, the humans had gone from using simple stone tools to splitting the atom and creating weapons that could destroy entire cities in a single flash of light. And no other species had ever developed so quickly or so dangerously. They had fought thousands of wars against their own kind, and with each war, they had developed new and more terrible ways to kill each other. And they seemed to learn nothing from the suffering they caused, except how to cause more of it. They had poisoned their own world with their industry, and they had driven countless other species on their planet to extinction through hunting and habitat destruction. And yet, somehow they continued to thrive despite conditions that should have ended their civilization many times over. The council of that ancient era had looked upon all of this evidence, and they had made what seemed like the only rational choice available to them. And that choice was to contain humanity forever. A subspace barrier was constructed around their solar system, using technology so advanced that even now it was not fully understood. And this barrier was completely invisible to human instruments and completely impenetrable to human vessels. Any radio signals that the humans sent out would be absorbed by the barrier and would never reach the stars. And any spacecraft they launched would be subtly redirected back toward their home world without the humans ever knowing what had happened. The Council had decided that humanity would be left alone to destroy themselves as Deathworlder species always did eventually. And when they were gone, the barrier would be removed and their solar system would be open for colonization by more peaceful peoples, except the humans had not destroyed themselves. Far from it, they had continued to advance and grow and reach for the stars with a determination that no other species had ever displayed. And now, after 3,000 years of imprisonment, they had done the impossible on the bridge of the vessel called Starward Pioneer. A woman named Hannah Cole stood watching as the strange energy field that had surrounded their solar system for decades finally disappeared behind them. And she allowed herself a small smile of triumph. Friend Derek Price looked up from his console with excitement shining in his eyes and announced that all systems were working perfectly and that they were officially the first humans to ever travel in true interstellar space. Hannah nodded and thought about all the years of work that had led to this moment, and all the brilliant minds that had contributed to breaking through the barrier that someone had placed around their home. Dr. Marcus Webb had discovered the barrier 15 years ago and had dedicated every moment since then to finding a way through it. And his breakthrough had finally come just 6 months ago, after years of failure and frustration, when the world learned that something had been keeping them trapped in their own solar system. The reaction had been unlike anything in human history, and nations that had been enemies for generations suddenly found themselves working together toward a common goal. Every country had contributed resources and scientists and funding to the project because every human on Earth understood that this was bigger than any conflict or disagreement that had ever divided them before. Set course for the nearest star system. Hannah ordered with calm authority, "It is time to find out who locked us in and why they did it." The Starward Pioneer turned toward the distant stars and began its journey into the unknown. And behind them, the barrier flickered once and then went dark, as if it knew that its purpose had finally failed in the Council chamber. 3,000 years of fear was about to collide with a species that had never learned how to give up, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. First contact. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been running without pause for 72 hours when the human vessel finally arrived in the Thelani home system, and every representative in the chamber felt their hearts race with fear as the primitive metal ship appeared on their sensors. Defense fleets from 12 different species had been called in to surround the small human craft, and hundreds of weapons were charged and ready to fire at the first sign of hostile action from the creatures that the galaxy had feared for 3 millennia. High Councilor Vareth watched everything from the command center of the great orbital station that circled above his home world, and he was surrounded by military advisors from every major power in the known galaxy who all wanted to know the same thing. How had the humans crossed 12 light years in just 3 standard days when they had only recently discovered that the barrier even existed around their solar system? "They are attempting to communicate with us," reported a Veloci officer who was monitoring the communication systems. "They are using simple electromagnetic radio waves, which is a very primitive method, but we can understand them." Vareth took a deep breath and ordered the message to be displayed for everyone to see. and he prepared himself for whatever horror the humans might unleash upon them. The holographic display came to life and showed two humans standing on what appeared to be the bridge of their ship. And every alien in the chamber leaned forward to get a better look at these legendary monsters. One of the humans was female with dark hair that was pulled back from her face, and there were scars on her skin that looked like they had come from some kind of violent injury in her past. The other was male and younger, with an expression on his face that seemed to show excitement rather than aggression. And he stood slightly behind the female, as if she was the one in charge. "This is Lieutenant Commander Hannah Cole of the Earth vessel Starbound Pioneer," the female human said in a voice that was calm and steady. "We come in peace, and we hope to establish friendly relations with the galactic community." The translator system struggled for a moment with the concept of peaceful intentions coming from a species that was known throughout history for constant warfare and violence. But eventually, the words came through clearly enough. Wrath gathered his courage and responded to the humans with what he hoped was appropriate authority in his voice. "You are humans," he said. "Your species was placed in quarantine for the protection of all sentient life in the galaxy, and your presence here is a violation of the laws that govern our civilization." Hannah Cole did not seem frightened or angry at these words, and her expression remained calm as she considered her response carefully. "We were imprisoned without any trial or explanation," she said. "No one ever tried to communicate with us or tell us why we were being locked away, and we believe that we deserve the chance to speak for ourselves." Ambassador Crix could not contain herself any longer, and she spoke up with venom dripping from every word that came out of her translated voice. "Your history speaks for you clearly enough," she said. "Your species has fought more wars in 10,000 years than every other species in the galaxy combined, and you have built weapons that can destroy entire worlds. And you eat the flesh of other creatures that share your planet." Hannah nodded slowly, as if she had expected these accusations and had prepared her answer long before this moment. "We eat animals," she said. "Creatures that do not have intelligence or awareness, and that is very different from eating sentient beings like yourselves." She paused for a moment and then continued speaking with a honesty that surprised everyone who was listening. "And yes, we have a violent history, and we have done terrible things to each other over the centuries that we are not proud of," she admitted. "But we have also created beautiful art and music and philosophy, and we have risked our lives to save strangers, and we have crossed the void between stars not to conquer anyone, but simply to connect with others." The young male human leaned forward and added his own words to the conversation. "We discovered the barrier around our solar system decades ago," Derek Price said. "We could have tried to destroy it with weapons, but instead we spent years finding a way through it without causing any damage, and we came here to talk with you, not to fight." Vareth looked around at his fellow counselors and saw confusion on many of their faces, because this was not what any of them had expected from the savage monsters described in the ancient records. These humans seemed almost reasonable, and that was somehow more unsettling than if they had come with weapons blazing and threats pouring from their mouths. "We will consider your request for diplomatic relations," Vareth said at last. "But you must remain in this system under guard, and you must not take any hostile action, or we will respond with overwhelming force." Hannah nodded her agreement without any argument. "We understand," she said simply. "We will wait for as long as it takes." The communication ended and the chamber erupted into arguments as different species debated what should be done about these unexpected visitors from the Forbidden Zone. Counselor Myra of the Sentinel World spoke quietly to those near her and said that the humans did not seem to match what the ancient records had described about their species. Ambassador Crix immediately disagreed and insisted that the humans were exactly what the records described, but that they were simply better at hiding their true nature than anyone had expected. Give them time, Crick said with certainty. Their savage instincts will emerge eventually, and then we will see the monsters that our ancestors warned us about. But as the debates continued and the hours turned into days, some of the counselors began to wonder if perhaps their ancestors had been wrong about humanity all along. And on the stalwart pioneer Hannah Cole sat in her quarters and thought about the enormous task that lay ahead of her and the 47 brave humans who had volunteered to be the first ambassadors of their species to a galaxy that feared them. She knew that every word she said and every action she took would be judged and analyzed and used as evidence either for or against all of humanity. And the weight of that responsibility was almost too heavy to bear. But humans had always been good at carrying heavy burdens, and Hannah was determined to show the galaxy that her species was worth knowing. The truth revealed, 3 months had passed since the stalwart pioneer had arrived in the Thelani system, and during that time, the 47 humans on board had been watched and studied and questioned by nearly every species in the galactic community. Marcus Webb had become something of a celebrity among the alien scientists who were fascinated by the breakthrough he had made in subspace physics. And he spent long hours in the research laboratories, sharing human mathematics and receiving galactic star charts in return. Cultural specialist Linda Santos had begun the enormous task of learning about the dozens of different alien languages and customs that existed in the galaxy. And she filled hundreds of data files with her observations and translations. Medical officer Dr. Kevin Park had provided samples of human blood and tissue and hair for the alien scientists to study, and what they found had horrified and fascinated them in equal measure. The humans were even more dangerous than the ancient records had suggested because their bodies contained systems and abilities that no one had ever imagined possible. Their immune systems were like tiny armies that fought constantly against invaders, and their bones could heal themselves after being broken, and their brains could rewire their own connections to recover from injuries that would kill any other species. But the most surprising thing about the humans was their behavior, because they did not act like the savage monsters that everyone had been taught to expect. Hannah Cole had spent most of her time in meetings with various council representatives answering their endless questions about human history and culture and intentions. And she had been completely honest about everything, even when the truth was painful to admit. Your species fought 2 global wars in a single century, Councillor Vera said during one of these meetings. You killed millions of your own kind in ways that were cruel beyond imagination. We did. Hannah agreed without trying to make excuses, and afterward we built organizations to try to prevent it from happening again, and we created courts to punish those who committed crimes against humanity, and we signed treaties to ban the worst weapons we had invented. She paused and looked directly at Varth with eyes that held both shame and pride. We are not perfect, she said. We have never claimed to be perfect, but we learn from our mistakes and we try to be better than we were before. Vareth found this concept difficult to understand because most species either denied their failures or tried to hide them from others. You still have weapons that could destroy your entire world, he pointed out. Yes, we do, Hannah admitted. And we have chosen not to use them for over 80 years because we understand what would happen if we did, and no one wants that outcome. So you keep the peace through the threat of total destruction, Vareth said slowly. It is not a perfect system, Hannah replied, but it works for us because humans are practical creatures who find solutions that fit our nature rather than trying to pretend we are something we are not. Everything changed when a Veloci science vessel discovered something unexpected in a remote and forgotten star system far from the major trade routes deep. Within an abandoned station, they found an ancient data archive that contained records from the original survey. of Earth 3,000 years ago. And what those records revealed shook the entire foundation of galactic civilization. The original survey had been conducted by a species called the Preservers, who had died out long ago, and they had spent years observing humanity during one of their most violent periods when European nations were colonizing other continents. They, Preservers, had seen the cruelty and the bloodshed and the suffering that humans inflicted on each other during this dark time. And they had recorded all of it in careful detail. But they had also recorded something else that the council of that era had chosen to ignore. They had documented the art that humans created, and the music they played, and the stories they told each other around fires at night. And they had observed acts of incredible kindness alongside the cruelty. The Preservers had watched humans risk their own lives to save strangers, and they had seen parents sacrifice everything for their children, and they had witnessed love and compassion flourishing even in the darkest of times. In their final report, the Preservers had recommended that humanity be contacted and welcomed into the galactic community. And they had argued that the violent nature of humans could be channeled into something remarkable if given the right guidance. But the Preservers had been overruled by the council of that era, which was dominated by species who feared any challenge to their established power and comfortable way of life. Quarantine had never been about protecting the galaxy from dangerous monsters. It had been about protecting the ruling species from a people who might one day grow strong enough to challenge their dominance. When this truth was revealed to the current council, the chamber erupted into chaos and accusations flew in every direction as species turned against each other. Those who had supported the quarantine for generations found themselves accused of conspiracy, and those who had questioned it demanded apologies and payment for 3,000 years of lies. The entire system of galactic governance was suddenly called into question as everyone wondered what other lies they had been told. Hannah Cole watched all of this from the observation gallery above the council chamber, with Derek Price standing beside her. "You do not seem surprised by any of this," Derek said to her. Hannah shook her head slowly. "I am not surprised," she replied. "Fear of those who are different and protection of power and privilege are the same everywhere in the universe. And we do the same things on Earth, just on a smaller scale. So what do we do now?" Derek asked. Hannah turned to face him with determination burning in her eyes. "We prove them wrong," she said. "Every species in that chamber is waiting for us to act like the monsters they were taught to fear, and we are going to show them something better instead." The chaos in the council chamber continued for many more hours, but something had fundamentally changed in the way the galaxy looked at humanity. They were no longer just dangerous animals to be contained. They were a mystery to be solved. Trial by fire. 6 months after the stalwart pioneer had emerged from the quarantine zone, the galaxy faced a crisis that would test every assumption that had ever been made about humanity and their true nature. A group of extremists within the Veloci Empire had formed an organization that called itself the Purity Movement, and they believed that the galaxy had become weak and corrupt through the mixing of different species and cultures. They launched coordinated attacks on 3 frontier colonies without any warning, and thousands of innocent civilians from multiple species were killed in the first wave of violence. The Purity Movement declared that they intended to cleanse the galaxy of what they called genetic contamination. And they announced that they would start with the newly arrived humans, but would eventually target any species they considered to be inferior. The council response to this threat was slow and confused, because the different species could not agree on how to respond, and their military forces were deployed in a scattered and uncoordinated way that allowed the Purity Movement to stay one step ahead. The extremists struck again and again at undefended targets, and the death toll continued to rise. While the council argued about jurisdiction and command authority, then the humans arrived. The stalwart pioneer had been joined by 3 additional Earth vessels that had been constructed in secret before the quarantine was breached. And together they formed a small but capable task force under the command of Hannah Cole. She contacted the council directly and did not ask for permission or wait for approval. "People are dying while you argue about politics," Hannah said to the assembled representatives. "We are going to stop the purity movement, and you can either help us or stay out of our way." Councillor Crix objected immediately and reminded Hannah that humans had no authority to take military action in galactic space. It stopped being a matter of authority when the purity movement declared their intention to exterminate my species. Hannah replied calmly, "We are involved now whether anyone likes it or not." What happened next would be remembered in galactic history as the 3 Days War, although it was less of a war and more of a demonstration of what humans were truly capable of when they had something worth fighting for. Human ships were slower than their galactic counterparts and less elegant in their design, but they had been built by a species that had spent thousands of years perfecting the art of warfare. Their weapons were simple but devastating, and their tactics were unpredictable in ways that confused and terrified the purity movement. Commanders who had never faced an enemy like this before, the human crews fought with a ferocity that shocked even the hardened veterans of the extremist forces, and they seemed to have no fear of death or injury as long as they could protect the innocent people who were depending on them. Lieutenant Jake Morrison led a boarding party onto a purity movement cruiser that was twice the size of his own ship. And when his team encountered a squad of Veloci warriors in the corridors, he defeated them in close combat using nothing but a standard issue knife and his own bare hands. Dr. Kevin Park worked without rest for 47 hours straight, treating wounded aliens alongside wounded humans, and he refused to stop even when his own hands were shaking from exhaustion. Linda Santos coordinated intelligence from dozens of different sources across the combat zone, and she predicted purity movements with an accuracy that seemed almost supernatural to the aliens who watched her work. Through it all, Hannah Cole directed every aspect of the operation from the bridge of the Pioneer, her voice calm and steady, even as her ships engaged enemy forces that outnumbered them by 10 to 1. The battle reached its climax when human Marines launched an assault on the Purity Movement Command ship, where the leaders of the extremist organization had gathered to plan their next wave of attacks. The fighting was brutal and casualties were heavy on both sides, but the humans pushed forward with a determination that could not be stopped. When the smoke cleared and the weapons fell silent, the leaders of the purity movement had been captured alive, not killed in battle and not executed for their crimes, but captured and restrained so that they could stand trial for what they had done. This act of mercy confused the galactic community more than anything else the humans had done since arriving in their space in the aftermath of the 3 Days War. Councillor Verath requested a private meeting with Hannah Cole to ask her a question that had been bothering him since the fighting ended. "Your species is capable of such terrible violence," he said. "I watched your soldiers tear through the purity movement forces like they were nothing, and I saw the fear in the eyes of beings who thought they were the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy." He paused and his 4 eyes blinked with genuine confusion. "And yet you showed mercy to those who would have exterminated every human in existence," he continued. "You captured them alive when you could have killed them easily, and no one would have blamed you for it." Hannah thought about the question for a long moment before she answered. "That is exactly what makes us human," she said finally. "We know what we are capable of because we have seen it throughout our history, and we have done terrible things to each other that we can never take back." She met his gaze with steady eyes. "But we also have the ability to choose what kind of species we want to be," she continued. Every day we make that choice, and today we chose to be merciful. And what kind of species do you want to be? Vareth asked. Hannah smiled for the first time since the crisis had begun. Better, she said simply. We want to be better than we were yesterday, and we want to keep getting better every day for as long as our species exists. Vareth had no response to this because it was a concept that his people had never considered. And he wondered if perhaps the galaxy had been wrong about humanity all along. A new dawn. 5 years had passed since the stalwart pioneer had emerged from the quarantine zone and changed everything that the galaxy thought it knew about the universe. The old council structure had been completely replaced by a new organization called the Assembly of Species, and humanity now held a permanent seat, alongside the original 47 member civilizations as full and equal partners in galactic governance. The quarantine barrier that had surrounded the solar system for 3,000 years had been completely dismantled, and Earth had become one of the most popular destinations in known space for tourists and scholars and diplomats who wanted to see this remarkable world for themselves. Millions of aliens traveled to Earth every year to walk the streets of human cities and taste human food and experience human art and music. And most of them left with a completely different understanding of the species they had been taught to furnish. Everything was peaceful, of course, because the galaxy was still full of conflicts and disagreements, and old prejudices died slowly among species that had believed certain things for thousands of years. The purity movement had been defeated in the 3 Days' War, but their ideologies still survived in dark corners of the galaxy. And there were still those who hated and feared humanity simply because of what they were human. Expansion into the former quarantine zone had created tensions with species that had grown accustomed to harvesting resources from that region. And negotiations over territorial rights sometimes became heated and difficult, but there was also more hope in the galaxy than anyone had felt in a very long time. And much of that hope had been inspired by the humans who continued to surprise everyone with their determination and creativity. Dr. Marcus Webb had established a research institute on Earth where human and alien scientists worked together on problems that neither could solve alone. And his breakthrough in subspace physics had opened entirely new possibilities for travel between the stars. What had once taken weeks could now be accomplished in just a few days. And the galaxy had become a smaller and more connected place. Because of human innovation, Linda Santos had become the first human ambassador to the Assembly of Species. And her deep understanding of alien cultures made her uniquely suited to bridge the gaps between civilizations that had never trusted each other before. She had negotiated treaties and resolved disputes and earned the respect of beings who had once considered humanity to be nothing more than dangerous animals that should have been exterminated long ago. Jake Morrison had retired from military service after the 3 Days' War and had become a teacher instead. And he dedicated himself to training the next generation of human peacekeepers who would protect the innocent no matter what species they belonged to. His students went on to serve in joint human and alien security forces on frontier colonies throughout the galaxy. And they carried his lessons about honor and mercy with them wherever they went. Dr. Kevin Park had developed new medical techniques that combine the best of human and alien knowledge. And his work had saved millions of lives across dozens of different species. His research into regenerative medicine had given hope to beings who had never known it before. And hospitals throughout the galaxy now used methods that he had pioneered, and Hannah Cole had become something that she had never expected or wanted. She had become a symbol. Her image hung in the halls of the Assembly of Species as a reminder of the day when a people that everyone had feared had proven themselves worthy of the stars through courage and compassion and an Unwillingness to give up on the dream of a better future, she stood, now on the observation deck of the great orbital station above the Thelani home world. And she watched as a fleet of ships, crewed by humans and aliens together, departed for the unexplored regions beyond the boundaries of known space. "You look like you are thinking about something important," Derek Price said as he joined her at the viewport. He wore the uniform of a full captain now and commanded his own vessel, and his face had aged in the 5 years since they had first broken through the barrier together. "I'm just thinking about how far we have come," Hannah replied without looking away from the departing ships. 5 years ago, we were prisoners who did not even know that anyone else existed in the universe, and now we are explorers again. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had not broken through the barrier? Derek asked. Hannah shook her head slowly. "We were always going to break through," she said with certainty. "That is what humans do when we see a wall in front of us, and that is what we will always do, no matter how impossible the obstacle might seem. The same nature that scared the Council into quarantining us in the first place," Derek observed. "The same nature that saved those colonies during the 3 Days' War," Hannah replied. "The same nature that is driving those ships out into the unknown right now to discover what no one has ever seen before." She turned to face her old friend with a smile on her face. "We are not perfect," she said. "We never will be perfect, and anyone who expects perfection from us will be disappointed forever." She looked back out at the stars. "But we are worth knowing," she continued. "We are worth trusting, and we are definitely worth having on your side when things get difficult." Across the galaxy, on 100 different worlds, humans were proving her words to be true every single day. They were scientists making discoveries and soldiers protecting the innocent and diplomats building bridges and doctors healing the sick and artists creating beauty and engineers solving impossible problems. They were everything that the ancient records had promised they could be, and everything that those records had warned they might become. They were human, and for the first time in 3,000 years the galaxy was grateful for it. High Counselor Vereth watched from his office in the assembly chambers as the exploration fleet disappeared into the darkness between stars, and he allowed himself a rare smile as he thought about how much had changed since that terrifying day when the first human ship had emerged from the quarantine zone. "What are you thinking about?" his aide asked. "I am thinking that perhaps we were wrong to fear them," Vereth said slowly as he turned back to his work. "Perhaps we should have been hoping for them all along." "Hoping for what exactly?" his aide Askedvereth considered the question for a long moment before he answered. "Hoping for the species that would be brave enough to show us what we could all become if we stopped being afraid of the future." And somewhere out in the endless darkness between galaxies, the human ships continued their journey into the unknown, carrying with them the hopes and dreams of a species that had never stopped reaching for the stars. The end.